All right. Good morning. It's the Donnie and Tom show today. Yes, as we spoke last time, we're together for a week down here at the beach with our families. The weather hasn't been the greatest so far, but it doesn't matter. Here we are. So we're sharing the computer today, as you can tell, and we've put our title as Warriors Charts today. So as you can see, but anyway, I'm going to pull up my screen share here so we can get the text up. Usual format. If Donnie could remind me how to do that. Oh, thank you. A little bit technically disadvantaged today. All right, there we go. Okay, so last time we finished through Rule 11, which was the final rule in the astral plane. And now we move into Rule 12, which is the first of the physical plane rules. So we'll get right into it. Rule 12. The web pulsates. It contracts and expands. Let the magician seize the midway point and thus release those prisoners of the planet whose note is right and justly tuned to that which must be made. Rule 12 is broken into two subsections, the interludes and cycles, and the prisoners of the planet. This is going to be some good stuff. Yeah. Okay. Interludes and cycles. We now come to the four rules which concern the physical plane. In many ways, their understanding is far more difficult than was the case in the other rules. In just the same way, the practical application is far harder than theorizing. We can frequently think with clarity and desire rightly, but the working out into physical plane manifestation of the subjective ideas under law and constructively is never an easy thing to do. It is, however, just at this point that a white magician begins to do his real work. And it is just here that he encounters failure and finds that his inner grasp of reality does not necessarily result in correct creative activity. In a treatise on cosmic fire, there will be found certain points of interest for us to consider. And I would like to quote a few words from them. It might be useful here to remember that in the work of creation, the white magician avails himself of the current ray influences. With the fifth, third, and seventh rays are in power, either coming in at full meridian or passing out, the work is much easier than when the second, sixth, or fourth are dominant. At the present time, the seventh ray, as we know, is rapidly dominating, and it is one of the easiest of the forces with which man has to work. Under this ray, it will be possible to build a new structure for the rapidly decaying civilization and to erect the new temple desired for the religious impulse. Under its influence, the work of the numerous unconscious magicians will be much facilitated. It is apparent, therefore, that the day of opportunity is with us, that the coming generation can, if it so wishes, perform the magical work with many of the factors present which will tend to produce satisfactory results. The fifth ray is passing out, but its influence can still be felt. The third ray is at full meridian, and the seventh ray is rapidly coming into right activity. Much will consequently occur to make man successful, provided he can preserve constantly a right orientation, purity of motive and of life, a stabilized and receptive emotional body, and that inner alignment which will make his personality a true vehicle for his soul or self. Very interesting analogy works out as we study the words. The web pulsates, it contracts and expands. The underlying thought is that of pulsation, of diastole and systole, of ebb and flow, of cyclic activity, of the day of opportunity and the night of inactivity, of inflow and output, and of those many appearances and disappearances which mark the sweep of all lives in all kingdoms and dimensions. This day and night cycle, which is the inevitable mark of manifested existence, has to be recognized. One of the things which every disciple has to learn, putting the truth in simplest terms, is to achieve that wisdom which is based on a knowledge of when to work and when to refrain, and on an understanding of those periods or interludes which are characterized by speech and by silence. It is here that mistakes are made, here that many workers fail to make good. This entire rule might be given in the following paraphrase, which will merit careful thought and which I will elucidate somewhat. God breathes, and his pulsating life emanates from the divine heart and manifests as the vital energy of all forms. It flows, pulsating in its cycles throughout all nature. This constitutes the divine inhalation and exhalation. Between this breathing out and the breathing in comes a period of silence and the moment for effective work. If disciples can learn to utilize these interludes, they can then release the prisoners of the planet, which is the objective of all magical work performed during this world period. With the manner in which this one life of the solar system works, and these vast interludes of meditative silence, called technically a pralaya, we need not concern ourselves. The activity of the universal mind and its comprehensive purpose can only be perceived when each son of God enters consciously into his divine heritage. The mode of working by means of which our planetary life utilizes the cycles of silence concerns him alone, and it must be remembered that each planetary logos has a different pulsation, a varying periodic interlude, and his own unique method of procedure. What does concern the student of these instructions, however, is how he can himself attain a definite constructive activity in his interludes. These interludes, for the purpose of our discussion, fall into three categories. One, life interludes, those periods wherein the spiritual man is out of incarnation and has withdrawn into the egoic consciousness. These, for the little evolved, are practically non-existent. They cycle in and out of incarnation with amazing rapidity. The physical plane analogy of this rapidity of activity is to be found in the intense rushing to and fro of the ordinary man as he meets the exigencies of existence, and also in the difficulty he evidences in patience and in waiting and in achieving the meditative poise. As growth takes place, the periods of withdrawal from incarnation steadily lengthen till the point is reached when the periods out of physical manifestation greatly exceed those spent in outer expression. Then the interlude dominates. Periods of outgoing, exhalation, and inbreathing, inhalation, are relatively brief, and the point to be emphasized, these two periods are colored and controlled by the purposes of the soul, formulated and recorded on the mind during the interlude between the two more active stages of experience. The inner life slowly developed during the cyclic interludes becomes the dominating factor. The man gradually becomes subjective in his attitude, and the physical plane expression is primarily then the result of the inner thought life and not so much the result of reaction to physical plane occurrences and the restlessness of the desire nature. Two, the ebb and flow of daily life during a particular incarnation will also demonstrate its interludes, and these the aspirant has to learn to recognize and to utilize. He has to register the distinction between intense outgoing activity, periods of withdrawal, and interludes wherein the outer life seems static and free from active interest. This he must do if he is to avail himself fully of the opportunity which life experience is intended to furnish. The whole of life is not concerned in one furious continuous stretch of rushing forth to work, nor is it comprehended in one eternal siesta. It has normally its own rhythmic beat and vibration and its own peculiar pulsation. Some lives change their rhythm and mode of activity every 7 years. Others alter every 9 or 11 years. Still, others work under shorter cycles and have months of strenuous endeavor, followed by months of apparent non-effort. Some people, again, are so sensitively organized that in the midst of work, events and circumstances are so staged that they are forced into a temporary retirement wherein they assimilate the lessons learned during the preceding period of work. Two groups of human beings work with apparently no physical plane ebb and flow, but manifest steadily an urge to work. These are people who are so little evolved and so low down, if one might thus express it, on the ladder of evolution, and so predominantly animal that there is no mental reaction to circumstances, but simply a response to the call of physical needs, and the use of time for the satisfaction of desire. This never lets up, therefore there is a little that can be called cyclic in their expression. They include the unthinking toiler and the uncivilized man. Then there are those men and women who are on the opposite scale and have climbed relatively high on the ladder of progress. These are so emancipated from the purely physical and are so aware of the natural of desire that they have learned to preserve a continuous activity based on discipline and service. They work consciously with cycles and understand somewhat their nature. They know the divine art of abstracting their consciousness into that of the soul, and contemplation can control and wisely guide their work in the world of men. This is the lesson which all disciples are learning. And this is the high achievement of the initiates and trained workers of the race. Third type of interlude, the one with which we are here primarily concerned as we consider the magical work on the physical plane, is the interlude achieved and utilized during the meditation process. With this, the student must familiarize himself, for otherwise he will be unable to work with power. This interlude or period of intense silence differentiates itself into two parts. There is first of all the interlude which we call contemplation. I would remind you of the definition given in a book by Evelyn Underhill, which describes contemplation as an interlude between two activities. This period of silence succeeds upon the activity found so difficult by the beginner of making the alignment in between soul, mind, and brain, of quieting the emotional body, and of achieving that concentration and meditation which will serve to focus and reorient the mind upon a new world and place it within the sphere of influence of the soul. It is analogous to the period of inhalation. In this cycle, the outgoing consciousness is gathered in, lifted up. When success crowns this effort, the consciousness then slips out what we call the personality, the mechanism aspect, and becomes a changed consciousness. The soul on its own plane becomes active, and of this activity, the mind and brain are aware. From the standpoint of personality activity, an interlude takes place. There is a point of inspired waiting. The mechanism is entirely quiescent. The mind is held steady in the light, and the soul, in the meantime, thinks, as it is its habits, in unison with all souls, taps the resources of the universal mind and formulates its purpose in line with the universal plan. This cycle of recorded soul activity is followed by what might be called the process of exhalation. The interlude comes to an end. The waiting mind again becomes active, and insofar as it has been rightly oriented and held in a purely receptive attitude, it becomes the interpreter and instrument of the soul, which has now turned the light of its countenance upon the attentive personality. Through that medium, it can now work out the plans formulated in the interlude of contemplation. The emotional nature is swept by desire to make objective the plans with which the reoriented mind seeks to color its experience. And subsequently, the brain receives the transmitted impression, and the physical plane life is then adjusted so that those plans can properly materialize. This, of course, delineates a mechanism trained and adjusted and rightly responsive, a rare thing indeed to find. The second part of the interlude only becomes possible when the first or contemplative interlude has been achieved. The disciple who is seeking to cooperate with the hierarchy of masters and to manifest this cooperation by active participation in their work on the physical plane has to learn to work not only through the contemplative realization, but through a scientific utilization of the interludes developed in breathing between points of inhalation and exhalation in the purely physical sense of the term. This is the true science and objective of pranayama. The brain consciousness is necessarily involved. The interlude between breaths is only capable of right use where man has achieved the power to follow the interlude of contemplation, affecting the soul and the mind and the brain. Just as the mind has been held in the light, has been receptive to the soul impression, so the brain has to be held receptive to impression from the mind. One interlude, therefore, from the standpoint of the united soul and personality, takes place after the period of soul inhalation, when the outgoing consciousness has been gathered inward, and the other takes place at the close of that interlude when the soul again comes outgoing consciously to the objective world. Exhalation takes the place of inhalation, also has its interlude. The disciple has to learn facility in utilizing these two soul interludes, one of which produces effect upon the mind, and the other upon the brain. There is, as always, a physical plane analogy of this process of divine inhalation and exhalation, with its two interludes of silence and of thought. Let me again reiterate the consequences of these interludes. In the higher interlude, abstract or divine thought impresses the soul and is transmitted to the waiting mind. The other, the mind through concrete thought and an attempt to embody divine thought in form, impresses the brain and produces action through the medium of the physical body. Students of occultism who have demonstrated their devotion and their mental poise, and who, to use the ancient formula of the schools of meditation, have kept the 5 commandments and the 5 rules, have achieved right poise, can begin to use the interludes between the 2 aspects of physical breathing for intense activity and the use of the power of will to produce magical effects. The consciousness focused in the brain and having participated in the work of contemplation can now proceed to the work of materializing the plan upon the physical plane by the focused energy of will used in the silence by the conscious man. As can be seen, these breathing interludes are also 2 in number, after inhalation and after exhalation, and the more experienced the disciple, the longer will be the interlude and the greater the opportunity, therefore, for focused magical work and for the utterance of those words of power, which will make divine purpose to be. It would not be right or proper for me to enlarge here upon the work of utilizing these midway points, as they are called in Rule 12, which the magician seizes and which he employs in constructive work. In them, he consciously uses energy, directing it as he sees it. In them, he consequently comes in contact with those forces and lives which he can employ and command to bring to him what he requires for the furtherance of spiritual purposes and for the work of constructing those forms and organisms which may be needed. In them, he goes forward with the work of releasing the prisoners of the planet. And in them, he becomes conscious of his fellow workers, of the group of world mystics, and of the hierarchy of souls. In instructions such as these, which are to be read by the general public, it would be most unwise to give more explicit directions. Enough has been left unsaid to make it impossible for any but a deeply learned student to arrive at the necessary correlations which will enable him to carry forward the work of the interludes, in which alone magical work can be done. You might ask, why is this so? Why are the secrets of the breath so carefully guarded? Because the efficacy of black magic is found right here. There is a point where both black and white magic employ necessarily one similar stage of the work. Certain men with potent wills and clear and untrained minds, but animated by purely selfish purpose, have learned to use the lower of the 2 soul interludes. that which concerns the relation of mind-brain. Through an intense application and a knowledge of the science of the centers, they have been enabled to work out their selfish plans and to impose their will and mental authority upon the prisoners of the planet. Thus, they have wrought much harm. They have no desire to participate in the higher interlude wherein the soul is active and the mind responsive. The intellectual activity and the responsiveness of the brain to mind impression is all that concerns them. Both white and black magicians, as you see, employ the lower interlude, and both know the significance of the physical breathing interludes. But the white magician works from the soul level out into the manifested world and seeks to carry out the divine plan, whilst the black magician works from the level of the intellect as he seeks to achieve his own separative ends. The difference is not only that of motive, but also of alignment and the radius of the consciousness and its field of expansion. Hence, you will see why such extreme caution is evidenced by all true teachers, as they endeavor to teach the nature of the magical word. Only the tested and the true, only the unselfish and the pure can be given the full instructions. All can be given the information concerning the major interludes of soul mind and mind brain. Only a few can as yet be trusted with the significant information concerning the minor interludes, carried on in the physical body between breaths and in the brain consciousness. One other point might be of interest before I proceed to speak of the prisoners of the planet and the work to be done with them. Humanity at this time is passing through a cycle of excessive activity. For the first time in human history, this activity embraces mankind on a large scale in the entire three aspects of the personality consciousness. The physical bodies, the emotional and mental states of consciousness are all in a condition of potential upheaval. This unified triple activity is increased by a cycle of equally intense planetary activity due to the coming in of a new age, passing of the sun into a new sign in the zodiac, and the preparation consequently going on to fit man to work easily with the new forces and energies playing upon him. At the center of human life, integrating group of New World servers must meet, therefore, a very real need. Their work must primarily be to keep such a close link with the soul of humanity, made up of all souls on their own level of being, through their own organized soul activity, and there will always be those who can work in the interludes, and so keep the plan progressing and the vision before the eyes of those who cannot as yet themselves enter into the high and secret place. They have, as I oft times have said, to learn to work subjectively, and this they must do in order to preserve, in this cycle of activity and esoteric expression, preserve the power latent in all to withdraw into the center. Constitute the door, speaking symbolically. Excuse me. Capacities and powers can die out for lack of use. The power of divine abstraction and the faculty to what has been called the golden path which leads to the clear pool, and from thence to the temple of retreat, must not be lost. This is the first work of a group of world mystics, and they must keep the path open and the way clear of obstructions. Otherwise, white magic might temporarily die out, and the selfish purposes of the form nature assume undue control. This dire event happened in Atlantean days, and the then group of workers had to withdraw from all external activity and abstract the divine mysteries, hiding them away from the curious and the unworthy. Let me pause while I take a drink here. Now, a new attempt is being made to free the prisoners of the planet. The hierarchy through the group of world servers, now in process of formation, is seeking to externalize itself and to restore the mysteries to humanity to whom they truly belong. If the attempt is to succeed, it is basically necessary that all of you who have sensed the vision or seen a part of the intended plan should rededicate yourselves to the service of humanity, should pledge yourselves to the work of aiding to the utmost of your ability, ponder these words and search out their significance, of all world servers, and should sacrifice your time and give of your money to further the endeavor of the great ones. Rest not, above all, from your meditation work. Keep the inner link. Think truth at all times. The need and the opportunity are great. All possible helpers are being called to the forefront of the battle. All can be used in some way. If the true nature of sacrifice is grasped, if skill in action is developed, and if work without attachment is the effort of each and all of you. That ends the first subsection of Rule 12, 11, where are we? Any comments, Donnie?
Well, that's. It kind of shut me up, honestly. That's some pretty deep stuff there.
So I got to say, as I was reading it, I was getting a bit lost into, Rule 12. Interludes and cycles. So, yeah, as you said, kind of shut you up, but a lot there to reflect on.
My thought as we were getting towards the end of that was when you're operating on soul levels, when we're higher up on the chart, right? When we're on the fourth, when you make it to the fourth or the Buddhic plane, you're at the soul levels, operating at the spiritual triad. You're not, these things are coming natural.
Right.
So we're not thinking through this, like in the thought I'm doing this now, or I'm doing this now. These things are coming completely naturally out, you don't have to think about it as we're doing. We're learning this now through contemplating and thinking. But it is on those levels, right? Like it is. It's already that on soul levels. So we're the only ones out here on the physical expression that have to think, I guess you could say, contemplate. So, and then who's doing the work? We're not doing it.
Right.
It's being done by a higher self. So, it's a lot to make sense of. Try to make sense of. Or you're doing it from higher levels at that point.
Right.
Or it's being done from higher levels. I don't know.
Well, it seems to reference a few things here we've talked about before. Doing this out of pure purpose, your thought.
The need to serve is obvious.
To do it selflessly, right?
That becomes pretty obvious. Selflessness versus selfishness comes out. I saw remember the Yoga Sutras were referenced in there, the 5 rules. And pranayama being part of that, which we were just talking about before we started this again, which is interesting as always.
Yep, the intent here is to work from the soul level into the manifested world to carry out the divine plan. Versus working from a level of intellect for your own separative ends.
Well, that implies a level of soul infusion.
Right.
Right.
And I like how it touched that this is a narrative that really everybody should be looking at, because this is, like you said, the first rule of the physical plane.
A very interesting talk about the black and white magician and how how seemingly easy it is
Cross
to,
that line.
oh man.
Yeah. Well, especially,
So if you're trying to manifest stuff for yourself, you're wrong, for the lower self, or for pleasure, or for out of desire
right.
for material plane existence. You're really just lost at that point, kind of thing. You're back into ignorance in a lot of ways.
Well, that's where we need to.
It's just such a focus on higher. The need to stay focused higher all the time through, constant focus on higher.
I think where you're working from point of not pursuing and achieving to really benefit yourself so much,
Right.
at all,
Benefiting
really.
the whole.
Where we need to be operating from.
It's that dizzying
But
perspective
the problem, and it says it, it's this, the shift is amidst us right now. I think it said something here, right? I can't remember where it was back in here. Oh, yeah, humanity at this time is passing through the cycle of excessive activity. I think that wasn't it. Anyway, it referenced in there. Like, we're at the turn right now. And I see it as difficult for a lot of people to kind of see through that, because as we were talking about earlier this morning, there's this deeply ingrained mindset that people align achievement, success with attainment of what benefits them at a very personal level. And can't seem to see through that. So the difficulty is in overcoming that and truly pursuing to do things that benefit the whole of humanity. In some shape or form, doing something to completely benefit maybe your local community could even be something that would lead into benefiting humanity, because if you look at something like that on a grand scale, where if every community thought that way, every person in each community thought that way.
Yeah, well, I think the externalization of the hierarchy is in a big way to set the example of how we're supposed to live.
Right. And operate down here in our little
Prior to the return or the reappearance of
Right.
Christ to bring the new teachings of the new age, or of the Aquarian age. And prior to that high energy showing up, that advanced, very powerful energy coming in. Oh yeah, this is very deep stuff. But it's just getting ourselves to the point of being a part of this. at one with this group
Right.
instead of the collective unconscious at one with the hierarchy, the conscious.
Right.
Become part of that group. That's the shift.
All right. Well, we made it through the first subsection. We're on to the prisoners of the planet. You want to keep reading forward?
I think we do it.
Let's
I'm
do
all
it.
right with it.
Yeah,
You
we can
good
keep
with it?
reading forward.
Looking forward to this.
Moving. All right. The prisoners of the planet.
Hey, you want to stop it and make this a new video? We can make 2 videos today.
Let's do that.
Just hit
Yeah, stop share.
just
first.
go up. You don't even have to stop share. Just go up and then hit that and hit stop recording. And then go back up and hit record to the cloud again.